Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Hey, I'm having a great time at PAX right now.
That's
Seth.
what I was just going to say. One year we should do a live show from PAX.
We have an episode called Live-ish from PAX because I think it was the first time we actually recorded stuff there.
Oh, that's fun. That should be
Yeah.
what all the PAX, post-PAX pod episodes should be, called Live-ish from PAX.
Live-ish from PAX.
We should incorporate it in our post-PAX pod while we're here and able to talk about PAX. Maybe we should incorporate some fun Ryan and Ryan commentary.
We'll be sure to drop in some Ryan commentary.
Yeah, maybe we'll interview the Ryans.
We done that when when one of the Ryans played a game that they were excited to play, and we walked up after and we said, "Hey, this is Ryan. What do you think?" And we have them answer.
Man, I should get my own voice recorder.
You could probably get the same one that I got by next Friday.
It's true, but I don't pay for Amazon Prime anymore.
Oh, if you give me money, I'll just order it because I have Amazon Prime.
Ooh, maybe we could become part of your Amazon Prime family, and then I could do like before we meet up with you interviews with
Yes,
Ryan and Ryan,
yeah, that'd be funny.
like us on the train.
Yeah,
So yeah, it should be fun. The banter's all thrown off now.
the banter's all thrown off because we're talking about the fact that we're at PAX, we're enjoying ourselves, we're having a good time.
Good time.
We had some drinks last night. We played some games last night.
Yes, we're going to Temple Records.
Yes, or we went to Temple Records.
We went to Temple Records because this is Sunday. We're on our way home now. We went to Temple Records, which is a cool bar, and then
Chill bar.
chill
Good
chill
vibes.
bar with good vibes.
One of the best toilets in Boston.
Oh, that's a resounding review right there.
Every one of my friends, I was telling my friends, I said, "Oh, I went to Temple Records this weekend," and 3 of my friends said, "That's the best bathroom in Boston."
Hey, and I know where the worst bathroom is in Massachusetts.
Yes, I do too.
Salem, Massachusetts.
The mall, yeah. No, the bathroom at
Have
Temple
you-
Records, one of the toilets has a bidet
Oh,
and a seat warmer.
that is really nice. Have you been to the Witches Mall?
Yes,
bathroom?
yes, I've been to the worst bathroom in America.
It has its own Instagram.
I know.
Salem trash. Anyway, enough about bathrooms. We also may have escaped from a room. Or
We may have
possibly
escaped
just
from
drank.
a room, or just drank, or both.
We haven't decided yet. But anyway, back to the rigmarole. This is our mid-episode. It's after our pre-PAX pod and before our post-PAX pod. And so it's the bologna to the white bread of the 2 PAX pod episodes.
So next week or the week after, we'll do our post-PAX pod. But with us being at PAX, we obviously can't do that. So we're going to be talking about a great topic today, which we haven't got into yet.
We could do it. We have the technology. We do. We're just not doing it.
But we do have a great episode lined up for today. Before we do that, we'll get into what we've recently been playing. Seth, why don't you take it away first? What have you been recently playing?
Well, recently I have started playing and finished playing a game called Confidential Killings.
Ooh, we'll have to cue the Seth Beats a Game music.
I beat it in about four and a half hours. It's a game that was developed by Bran and Lorenzo Bonai and published by Surefire Games. It is a vignette puzzle adventure game where you solve murders, and you have to use your detective skills to search crime scenes, find clues, and solve the mystery and figure out who's behind all these confidential killings. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good palate cleansing game. Also, what I liked about the game is that there were puzzles to figure out, but the puzzles weren't too hard, which is my favorite type of puzzle games because I tend to get frustrated with puzzle games where the puzzles are too hard and also bored with puzzle games where the puzzles are too easy. So there needs to be the exact balance of puzzles that are just hard enough that I have to think, but not too hard that I don't have to think too hard. That's like my ideal puzzle game. Very difficult to find because people don't necessarily develop games directly for my intelligence. Specifically, they're not like, let me make this game for Seth to solve. But Confidential Killings felt it like that. It was a unique game. It was interesting. It had me hooked, and I'm pretty sure it was 4.5 hours, and I'm pretty sure that I beat it in one sitting. I think I had 4 hours on a weekend where I was given my own. Essentially, I was left unattended from my wife. I was essentially given time to be unattended, and when I'm unattended, I usually play video games, and I was unattended for 4 hours. And I decided to download and beat Confidential Killings. I did play the game during a Next Fest, so it was on my radar. And then I was like hemming and hawing and eventually bought it. And I'm glad that I bought it. I'm like excited to see if they're going to do any DLC. I think it's a game that they've got a pretty good mechanic down, and I'm excited to see what else they're able to do.
Nice.
Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Well, Seth, recently I've been playing a little game called Thomas and Friends Wonders of Sodor, which released actually as of the recording of this episode yesterday, March 17th, 2026, developed by Dovetail, which is the same company that gave us the different train simulator games. So Dovetail previously worked on Rail Simulator. They developed Train Sim World. They've developed Train Sim World 3. They developed Train Sim World 4. They're a company that primarily develops simulator games, primarily related to train simulators. And it made perfect sense that they would make the Thomas game, Wonders of Sodor. So Wonders of Sodor is a game where you get to drive trains from Thomas the Tank Engine, different locomotives. Specifically, you can, at this point in the release, you can drive Thomas, Diesel, Gordon, Percy, Emily, and there's a DLC which gives you James. And I got the deluxe edition, so I got James. Happy. I mean, can't get that. You can't get the game without James, right? I mean, James is necessary. But in the game, you can travel across the Isle of Sodor, play through different scenarios based on the show and the books, and it's just a delightful, simple train sim. Simple in the sense that it's probably not as complex as other train simulators, but still pretty decent for a train simulator. I have derailed multiple times, which is always distressing, and also I need to remember the fact that trains do in fact need to slow down a lot sooner than I think they do when they're coming up to a station. So if I'm booking it down the line at 60 miles per hour and a station's coming up in 200 yards, I should start slamming on the brakes, because otherwise I'm going to blow past that station, because trains weigh a lot and mass doesn't like to stop on a dime.
This game is $40.
I love Thomas. I think it's a fun game. I'm enjoying myself. I think it's just a delightful game to explore the Isle of Sodor. It's nice to see a lot of the locations from the show and the books represented kind of full 3D. I have encountered one or two glitches. The biggest glitch I encountered was I accidentally sent Thomas into the stratosphere because of a line issue where like I switched tracks by accident and it just launched Thomas directly into the air, and he just started spinning in the air doing like 360s. But yeah, that's Thomas and Friends Wonders of Sodor. I'm personally happy I picked it up, and personally happy I got a chance to play it. So and I'm excited to try it more and maybe beat my time getting from one location to the next, because the island is decently big. It's a pretty robust game, and I like it so far.
It looks like a fun game. It's exciting that you can play through the stories. I hope you can play through the story where you get bricked into the wall. That's the only.
You could go to that tunnel. That is one of the locations.
And eventually, it sounds like they'll release all the trains. So eventually, you'll be able to play as the duck train, as it were.
Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely obviously intention for them to release more DLC, and what I expect is they'll probably do packs. So what it will probably be is like Duck and Donald and Douglas. Maybe Bill and Ben, and I'm hoping we get the Skarloey Railway. That's the narrow gauge line, and I always like narrow gauges. I think they're fun because they're tiny. They're tiny little trains.
They are. I've ridden on a narrow gauge. I don't know where. Maine? Oh, yeah, Portland, Maine.
Portland, Maine has a narrow gauge railway.
I've ridden on the Portland, Maine narrow gauge rail randomly.
though they're cool. I like narrow gauge trains. So yeah, that's Thomas Wonders of Sodor. Definitively a children's game that I got really excited for, so I bought with my own well-earned money. Getting into today's episode, we're going to be talking a bit about a game that was a request from listener of the show, Brent. Brent wanted us to talk about Pokemon FireRed, and to do that, we have to talk about Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen as they were bundled together when they were released. Now, looking back at our episode history, I did a little research, and I found out that we talked about Pokemon way back in episode 39. So it's been almost 300 episodes since we first talked about Pokemon.
And it's Pokemon's 30th anniversary?
300 episodes, 30th anniversary. Back episode 39, we talked about kind of Pokemon as a whole, but primarily focused on Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green. I don't know how in depth we got. That was early days of Classic Gaming Brothers. Our notes weren't as robust as they are now. And yeah, Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, definitely games that we could revisit. But Pokemon Fire Red is kind of a cool game. I don't think I've actually... So I've played Pokemon Fire Red, but I think I've only played it through emulation because I never owned it for the Game Boy Advance. I did have a Game Boy Advance, but I only had like 3 or 4 games for it. I had Sonic Advance, Puyo Puyo, and I had a Star Wars game that was kind of bad, and a Shrek game that was also kind of bad. So I had 4 games for my Game Boy Advance. But Seth, did you ever play Pokemon Fire Red?
I did. I actually, I really like Pokemon Fire Red. I really enjoyed Pokemon Red, and so I also enjoyed Pokemon Fire Red. I believe a total conversion of Pokemon Fire Red is also available, where you play as a member of Team Rocket,
yes,
and you go through the entire game from Team Rocket's perspective, which is a lot of fun. And if you have an emulator and a ROM, you can go and search for a total conversion for Team Rocket. I think we talked about this in our modded games episode or something like that, but it's
we talked about like ROM hacks and stuff.
Maybe our ROM hack episode. We talked about it specifically in that episode, but for the purpose of this episode, check out Team Rocket Edition. It's a lot of fun. You start off with a Rattata, and you have to go into Mount Moon in the beginning of the game. So it's a fun take on the Pokemon game, and so I definitely recommend it if you're interested in playing Pokemon but don't want to just play Pokemon, want to play something a little bit different.
Yeah, actually, you mentioning that reminded me, I do own a physical copy of a Pokemon ROM hack, which is Pokemon Ash Gray. Pokemon Ash Gray is also a hack of Fire Red, and Pokemon Ash Gray is the story from the Pokemon anime. You play as Ash, you get a Pikachu, and you go through the beats of the anime, just in a Pokemon Fire Red's engine, down to like there's a sequence where you are trying to run away from Pidgeys that are attacking you, which is a sequence from the anime.
That's fun.
So it's a cool, cute little ROM hack. That's also one I recommend checking out. I think I had a physical copy of it. I have a physical GBA cartridge of it.
Oh, that's fun.
Now, to remind everyone, the original Pokemon games were released back in the 1990s, 1996 from Game Freak. The original idea for Pokemon came from the creator, Satoshi Taiji's hobby of collecting insects. Basically, he had the idea of what if instead of collecting insects, collected big creatures that weren't just insects. Now, the original game was released as Pocket Monsters Green and Red. The games introduced the world to the idea of Pokemon. These Pokemon are basically animals. They're creatures that can be captured in small capsules and used to fight your battles. If you got a beef with someone in the Pokemon world, have your nuclear rat go at that person, or have it fight that person's nuclear rat. You don't like the guy's shorts? Throw a ball at them and have them get crushed by Onyx. It's a fun idea, I guess, in a world where all disputes are apparently solved through animal fighting. But Pokemon, I think, has always been kind of a fun idea in that you're catching and training these animals. Now, when Green was originally released, it was later updated in Japan, and this update was known as Pokemon Blue. Pokemon Blue was released originally as a mail order exclusive in Japan and released to general retail in 1999. When it came time to bring the games to North America localized, Red and Blue were brought over, not Pokemon Green. Pokemon Green would remain in Japan, though there has since been fan translations of it, including I think one that Seth played, as he mentioned one of the first Pokemon games that he played back in that episode was Pokemon Green, I assume,
yes.
A fan translated version. Pokemon games were just a success, flat out. Game Freak had something on their hands that made a lot of money, and in 1998 Game Freak did the unthinkable, and that was release the game again, though this time they released Pokemon Red and Blue as one package, and that was called Pokemon Special Pikachu Edition. Not only did this combine parts of Red and Blue, but it also added Pikachu as the starter, partially in order to keep it a little closer in line to what was the popular anime series.
Pokemon wasn't just a success, it was a tidal wave. It spawned a still popular trading card game, manga, the anime, toys, movies, the works. Game Freak didn't just rely on the 3 games Red, Blue, Yellow, and of course would start working on new games when the Game Boy Color hit the market. In 1999, Pokemon Silver and Gold would be released for the Game Boy Color, adding 100 new Pokemon to the Pokedex. A third game, Crystal, would combine the two and round off the second generation of Pokemon. Crystal was the game that I was playing that I lost my save in, and that was really sad because I was many hours in. In 2001, the Game Boy Advance was released, so of course new Pokemon games would come along with it. In 2002, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire would introduce players to Generation 3 for Pokemon, adding yet more to the growing roster. In 2003, Game Freak made the announcement that they were in development of remakes for Red and Green, called FireRed and LeafGreen. Not only did these utilize the updated engine from Ruby and Sapphire, but you could also trade between Ruby and Sapphire and FireRed and LeafGreen.
The games were designed to keep the same spirit as the original Red and Green/Blue, while also updating the gameplay mechanics to a more modern standard. Game Freak had kind of a design mentality of keep it simple. A new tool was also developed for the Game Boy Advance, and this was the wireless adapter. The wireless adapter would be packaged with FireRed and LeafGreen, opening up a new way for players to do multiplayer. Before this adapter, multiplayer required a link cable, which was literally a cable that you would use to connect one Game Boy to the other. The wireless adapter, as the name implies, took out the need for you to directly wire together the Game Boys. A fun fact, and on theme with one of our last episodes, the idea for the wireless adapter came from when a Nintendo developer, Masato Kawara, after he played Diablo over LAN with some of his colleagues. They were playing Diablo and they said, hey, this is pretty cool, we should be able to do this with Pokemon, and they developed the wireless adapter.
Players within 30 to 50 feet of each other would be able to engage in multiplayer the same way that a link cable would work. Beyond Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, the adapter was compatible with Pokemon Emerald, the enhanced version of Ruby Sapphire, as well as a variety of other GBA games. Nintendo would actually create dedicated joy spots around Japan, which were areas that would let people hang out and use their wireless adapters to trade or battle. It's possible the wireless adapter also led to the Fire Red and Leaf Green initially having a small production run in Japan with a cap of 500,000. But as we'll get into sales figures, Pokemon sells very well. Of note is that when the game was released in North America, it was decided to keep the names Fire Red and Leaf Green, despite the fact that Green was never released in the US market. It would be funny if they just called it Fire Red and Leaf Blue.
Yeah.
Just called it a day. This was done intentionally, as the game's director, Junichi Masuda, wanted the leaf to not necessarily conflict with the icon of the flame used for Fire Red.
Yeah, I was reading that if it was water, then people would think it was the opposite game.
Right.
And he didn't want people to think that.
Yeah, or the game that puts the other game out. Arguably, fire would light a leaf on fire.
It goes together.
Just like the 3 starters. Yeah, fire is good against leaf, leaf is good against water, and water is good against fire.
Now, to get into the gameplay and the story, the gameplay of Pokemon is fairly straightforward, but if you've never played it, let me tell you how it goes. In the game, you play as a child who is tasked with collecting incredibly dangerous animals that you put into small balls. The game is structured similarly to an RPG, but instead of your character gaining levels, the Pokemon that you collect gain levels. You gain levels by combating other Pokemon and gaining experience points through these battles battles. Battles are typically done by engaging Pokemon at random. These are called random encounters. When you're walking through the wilderness, occasionally a Pokemon will decide to attack you, and you have to either battle it or run away. You also occasionally will encounter other trainers who will either engage you at random or that you have to challenge in order to progress in the game. Typically, Pokemon has what are called gyms, where there is a kind of central trainer that you have to do battle against in order to progress through the game. One of my favorite moments in the game is when it's in the original Pokemon, Pokemon Red, and I believe it also happens in Fire Red, is when you're walking and one person says, "I don't like your shorts," and then all of a sudden it just engages in a combat.
Have you ever seen there's like a YouTube short video of like being like a member of Team Rocket and like walking around in the world and seeing people like spinning in place and like walking with like live action people? It's pretty funny.
Getting away from the gameplay just for a bit, I do like the concept of Team Rocket because Team Rocket is a criminal syndicate that is very invested in the lives of children.
They are. They're like the mob when they cared about the neighborhood as well as making money.
Well, they're like the mob if the mob also just randomly picked on children who were trying to train their rat.
That's true. They're electrical rat.
They're electric rat. Now, as you battle the Pokemon, they gain experience, and after a certain point, when they reach a certain level, they make Darwin proud, and some Pokemon will evolve. When they evolve, they can learn some unique moves. They also get kind of a redesign, and they become a bit more stronger. Now, you don't have to evolve your Pokemon. I believe there are ways for most Pokemon to level up and never evolve, but evolving was always kind of exciting. I remember as a kid getting to that point where it was like your Pokemon's evolving, and all of a sudden it like glowed, and then it changed into a new Pokemon, and it was like, oh, your Charmander's become Charmeleon, and then your Charmeleon becomes Charizard.
Or your Magikarp has become Gyarados and is now actually able to participate in combat.
Yes, or your Metapod becomes Butterfree and also is now able to participate in combat because Metapod Soul Move is hardened.
Or Kakuna.
Now, for Fire Red, there were some gameplay changes to keep the game at the same level as Ruby and Sapphire. Some of these boiled down to quality of life changes like the ability to look up stats on the fly. Other changes included a function that shows you your last 4 actions prior to a save. This was done so that maybe you decided to stop playing Pokemon Fire Red for a few weeks and then you came back and when you loaded your save, that problem that always occurs when I reload a save after many weeks and I'm like, what the heck was I doing? This game actually will show you what you were doing, which I think is a nice function. As the game is backwards compatible with Ruby and Sapphire, you can conceivably have up to 350 Pokemon in the game. You could also connect the game to something called the Pokemon Box, which was on the GameCube, allowing you to organize your collection. It was also compatible with Pokemon Coliseum, which was also a GameCube game, and you could do trading through that as well. The plot of Pokemon involves the same plot as Red and Green and Blue. You're sent off into the Kanto region to collect Pokemon and eventually do combat against the Elite Four. Now, new to the game is something called the Sevi Islands. This is a region that contains Johto region Pokemon, or Pokemon from Generation 2. So it kind of gives you an excuse for collecting Pokemon from Generation 2, as they wouldn't have been in Pokemon Red and Green. The main difference, though, between Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green is that there are version-exclusive Pokemon. In Fire Red, there are Ekans, Growlithe, Scyther, Electabuzz, and Psyduck. In Leaf Green, it's Sandshrew, Vulpix, Pinsir, Magmar, and Slowpoke. In order for Fire Red players to get the Leaf Green Pokemon, you will need to trade with someone that has a copy of Leaf Green, or you gotta buy that copy yourself, which Game Freak didn't care because they're making money either way. So as long as you're trading with someone or you picked up that game to trade with yourself, Game Freak made money and they were happy about it. In Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, after defeating the Elite Four, legendary beasts will kind of be available for you to find. These depend on the starter that you have. So if you started with Squirtle, the beast is Raikou. If you picked Bulbasaur, it's Entei. And if you picked Charmander, it's Sequin. All of these legendary beasts are encountered at random in the Kanto region. Now, Seth, how did Pokemon do in terms of its sales? I bet it was, decently popular.
Pokemon sells very well. Full stop. Within a week, the game had combined sales of upward to 885,039 copies in Japan. While this sounds like a lot, it would be still less than Ruby and Sapphire, which sold 1.25 million units in its first 4 days. By 1 month after the release in the US, both games sold upwards of 1 million copies. It's reported by 2008, a total of 11.8 1.82 million copies were sold worldwide. I feel like the remastered or like packed-in games didn't sell as well as their like net new additions to the franchises. So like that's why I think it lagged behind.
That was something that was, but like is assumed is just remakes just don't sell as well, or at least back then they didn't sell as well. So that's likely why the sales weren't as good as Ruby and Sapphire. But 885,000 in 1 week is still not terrible.
Yeah,
in one country alone.
Yeah. Reviews praised the game. Nintendo Power gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. IGN gave it a 9 out of 10, and GameSpot gave it an 8.4 out of 10. Reviewers praised the gameplay updates and also mostly praised the graphics, though a few more critical reviews didn't think the graphical updates were really that necessary and that they didn't need it. But I liked FireRed, and I also like LeafGreen. I think they are nice to have.
I do think that Pokemon Red and Blue and Green, for that matter, I like their aesthetic a lot. I like that kind of classic style of the Pokemon graphics. However, I will say Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen look very nice. I think they are aesthetically pleasing games. I think that I'm not a big fan of anything like post GBA for the aesthetic of Pokemon. Like I played a little bit of Soul Silver, I think, for the DS, and I just wasn't that big of a fan of the aesthetic for that one. I think Pokemon like on the GBA and prior is just where it's at. That's where it excels.
Where it's at. It's where nostalgia is.
Yeah.
Versus like the 3D ones.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the 3D ones. I mean, I'm sure they're fine. I think they all play basically the same, so I don't know how much has changed I haven't played a Pokemon game in years, so I can't tell you if any of them play any differently, but I know that's a common criticism, though, is that they just haven't changed in the years. So in terms of legacy, though, for Fire Red and Leaf Green, Pokemon's in general legacy lasted long after Fire Red and Leaf Green. I mean, they're still coming out with new games today. But in terms of those two games in particular, they were re-released on Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 on February 27th of 2026. So this year, in fact, just last month, you could order through the eShop Fire Red and Leaf Green for your Nintendo Switch or your Nintendo Switch 2. Now, in Japan, there was exclusively a physical edition for these. They had recreated the original GBA boxes and contained laser engraved glass Pokeballs with the starters on them. So very fancy. They were like collector's editions that were exclusive to Japan. But really, that's it for the legacy of Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green beyond being just great games. In terms of Red and Green and Blue, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee would be kind of a remake of Pokemon Yellow, and that version is basically Red and Blue, kind of the definitive edition. So I guess the story lives on. They're still remaking Pokemon. Maybe one day they'll remake Fire Red, and then we'll just have a full circle of remakes where remakes of remakes and remakes get remade. And eventually all games will just be a remake, and that will be it.
And if you want a copy of the physical edition with the laser engraved glass Pokeballs, one green, one red, one blue for the 3 starters, you could buy it on eBay for $350.
Nice. Well, hey, for collectors, that's not bad. For me, I'll spend my $40 on Thomas. Unless you have any additional comments, Seth, we'll get into our retro rewinds. But do you have any additional comments on Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green?
No, but maybe one day we'll cover Pokemon Gold Silver.
Maybe. To get into our retro rewinds, Seth had me play Lands of Lore: The Throne of Chaos. Developed by Westwood and published by Virgin Games, Lands of Lore: The Throne of Chaos is a first-person dungeon crawler RPG in the same vein as Eye of the Beholder. In fact, from what I read, they intentionally made the game in the same vein as Eye of the Beholder because they wanted to capitalize on Eye of the Beholder, which was selling well. In the game, you pick a hero and you go on a quest. I quite like the aesthetic, though I did find navigation a bit frustrating. In fact, I had trouble getting out of the main castle at first. But I think what it boils down to is a lot of these old dungeon crawlers, the ones that don't have maps, really need maps. Either you need to map it out yourself, or it would be really nice if they had a mapping function in the game. But in this case, I didn't see a mapping function unless I was looking in the wrong place. So I did get a little lost. But other than that, I did enjoy the game from what I played. I mean, it's your standard dungeon crawler, but I still think it's pretty good. One thing I especially liked is that the main voice actor is Patrick Stewart, and I love Patrick Stewart. So I was happy to hear Patrick Stewart's voice.
Oh, that's fun.
So do I think Lands of Lore: The Throne of Chaos holds up? Absolutely, because Patrick Stewart always holds up. Next week, Seth, you can play Battletech, The Crescent Hawk's Revenge for MS-DOS.
I was in the era of Patrick Stewart doing video game voice acting because he was typecasted for John Luke Picard.
Yes, it was.
And he couldn't get any other acting gigs.
Yeah,
It wasn't until he became Professor Xavier did he birth from his typecast. Zach had me play Blades of Vengeance, developed by Beam Software and published by Electronic Arts for the Sega Genesis and the Mega Drive, and was released in the North America and European markets in 1993. Blades of Vengeance is a platformer game where you can pick a male warrior, a female warrior, or an old crotchety man. I chose to play as the male warrior with a big axe, and the game has a very pulp, Conan, Xena aesthetic, and just really feels like that era of fantasy. And I went through the world swinging my axe, got to a lava part in the first level, which was a pretty tough segment. It felt like flying on the carpet ride in Aladdin, and I was thrown a little bit, and I died a bunch of times. I imagine if I played these games more regularly because I had more free time, I would probably been fine. The controls handle well. I think the game ultimately holds up as what it is. It's got good art and it's got good controls. So if you are looking to play a platformer on the Sega Genesis, check out Blades of Vengeance. Next week, Zach, you could play Legend of Curandia, Book 2, The Hand of Fate for MS-DOS.
Sure, I'll do exactly that. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you have any thoughts or comments about Pokemon FireRed or LeafGreen, let us know. You can do so by emailing us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, via Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on YouTube. Like and subscribe. We're available on Patreon. Be sure to follow us. Be sure to also check us out on Twitch and all the social medias, and of course our website, www.classicgamingbrothers.com. Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.